The acrid smell of whiskey and unwashed bodies assaulted Abigail Greenberg's senses as she was shoved through the back door of the Rusty Spur Saloon in Julesburg, Colorado, her stepmother's bony fingers digging into her arm like talons. It was 1875, and at 18 years of age, Abigail never imagined she'd be treated like cattle at an auction. Yet here she was, being presented to a stranger with cold eyes and a smile that made her blood run cold. "$50 is my final offer," Meredith Greenberg hissed at the man who stood examining Abigail as if she were a horse he was considering purchasing. "She's strong, can cook, clean, and won't give you no trouble." The lie made Abigail's stomach turn. She had given nothing but trouble to her stepmother since the woman had married her father 5 years ago. "40, the stranger countered, his voice gravelly from years of tobacco. He reached out with dirty fingers to touch Abigail's face, but she jerked away, earning a painful squeeze from her stepmother. "You'll mind your manners, girl," Meredith warned under her breath. To the stranger, she said, 45, and I'll throw in her mother's silver locket." Abigail's eyes widened. The locket was the only thing she had left of her mother, who had died when she was 13. "No," she protested, her voice barely a whisper. The saloon's back door swung open again, and a tall figure stood silhouetted against the evening light. The newcomer's spurs jingled as he stepped inside, and his shadow stretched long across the wooden floor. "I believe the lady said no," came a deep voice, calm but commanding. The stranger and Meredith turned to face the intruder. Abigail looked up to see a man dressed in worn riding clothes, a dusty hat pulled low over his forehead, and a leather vest that had seen better days. Despite his weathered appearance, there was something striking about him. Perhaps it was the confidence with which he held himself, or the intensity in his blue eyes as they locked with hers. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the stranger growled, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. The cowboy didn't flinch. "I'm making it my business." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch that jangled with the unmistakable sound of coins. $100 for the lady's freedom." Meredith's eyes gleamed with greed. 100. "Cash in hand," the cowboy confirmed, tossing the pouch toward Meredith, who caught it reflexively. "Double your asking price, but she walks out of here with me now, and you never come looking for her again." Abigail held her breath, scarcely believing what was happening. Was this man actually buying her freedom or merely claiming her for himself? She couldn't be sure, but anything seemed better than being sold to the lecherous stranger who was now scowling at the interruption of his transaction. Meredith counted the coins quickly, her thin lips curving into a smile of satisfaction. "Deal." She released her grip on Abigail's arm, leaving behind angry red marks. "She's all yours, mister." "I ain't nobody's." Abigail found her voice, backing away from both her stepmother and the two men. The cowboy nodded respectfully. "No, madam, you certainly are not, but I suggest we leave before your stepmother has a change of heart." He gestured toward the door. "My horse is outside, we should ride." The stranger stepped forward, anger twisting his features. "Now wait just a minute." In one fluid motion, the cowboy drew his revolver, though he kept it pointed at the floor. "We're leaving. I suggest you don't follow." Abigail hesitated only for a moment before making her decision. This mysterious cowboy might be dangerous, but staying meant certain misery. She moved toward the door, her heart pounding. "You ungrateful little," Meredith began, but Abigail was already stepping out into the evening air, the cowboy close behind her. A magnificent chestnut horse stood tethered outside, saddlebags loaded for a long journey. The cowboy holstered his weapon and untied the reins. "Can you ride, miss?" he asked, leaving the question hanging. Abigail Greenberg, and yes, I can ride." Her father had taught her before his passing one of the few useful skills she'd acquired in her young life. "Wyatt Porter," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly. "We need to move quickly. Your stepmother struck me as the type who might fetch the law if she thinks there's more money to be made." Abigail glanced back at the saloon. "The sheriff in this town has been in her pocket since she married my father. You're right, we need to go." Wyatt nodded and helped her onto his horse before mounting up behind her. Abigail tensed at the proximity, having never been this close to a man before, but there was no time for propriety or second thoughts. The sound of angry voices could already be heard from inside the saloon. "Hold tight," Wyatt whispered, and with a click of his tongue, the horse took off, carrying them away from Julesburg at a gallop. Abigail clung to the saddle horn, her mind racing as fast as the horse beneath them. Who was this man who had just spent $100 to free her? What did he want in return? And most importantly, where were they going? The wind whipped her honey-brown hair from its pins as they rode, and she found herself simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. For the first time in years, she was free from her stepmother's cruelty, but at what cost? They rode hard for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and Julesburg, before Wyatt slowed the horse to a walk. They were following a stream that glinted silver in the moonlight, the surrounding cottonwoods offering some shelter from prying eyes. "We'll rest here briefly," Wyatt said, dismounting and offering a hand to help Abigail down. "The horse needs water." Abigail accepted his assistance, but quickly stepped away once her feet touched the ground. "Mr. Porter, I appreciate your intervention back there, but I need to know your intentions. Why did you help me?" Wyatt led the horse to the stream before answering. In the moonlight, she could see his features more clearly: strong jawline covered with a few days' worth of stubble, straight nose that had been broken at least once, and those intense blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. "I was having a drink in the saloon when I overheard your stepmother arranging the meeting out back," he explained, removing his hat to run a hand through his dark hair. "Where I come from, people aren't property to be bought and sold. It didn't sit right with me." "So you spent $100 on principal?" Abigail asked skeptically. A small smile touched his lips. "Let's just say I've been fortunate lately, won a decent purse in a poker game in Denver last week. And what do you expect in return for this? Rescue?" Wyatt's expression grew serious. "Nothing from you, Miss Greenberg. I can take you to the next town over or wherever you'd like to go. After that, you're free to do as you please." Abigail studied him, looking for any sign of deception. Men, in her experience, always wanted something. Her father had been the exception, but he'd been gone for 3 years now, leaving her at the mercy of a stepmother who resented her existence. "I don't know where to go," she admitted finally. "I have no family, no money." Wyatt nodded thoughtfully. "I'm headed to my brother's ranch near Fort Collins. He could use help around the place paying work, if you're interested, or I can leave you at a respectable boarding house in the next town with enough money to get started elsewhere." Abigail considered her options. She didn't know this man, but he'd already shown more kindness than she'd experienced in years, and the promise of honest work was appealing. She'd been little more than a servant in her stepmother's house anyway. "Your brother wouldn't mind?" she asked. "James is a good man. He and his wife Sarah have a growing operation, and they're always looking for reliable help. You'd have your own cabin, meals, and fair wages." It sounded too good to be true, which made Abigail wary, but what choice did she have? Return to Julesburg and the stepmother who had tried to sell her? Strike out on her own with no resources? "I'll go with you to Fort Collins," she decided. "But I want you to understand something, Mr. Porter. I can take care of myself. I won't be beholden to anyone, not even a rescuer." Wyatt's smile widened, genuine respect in his eyes. "I never doubted that for a minute, Miss Greenberg." He offered his canteen. "Drink some water. We've got a long ride ahead of us." As they rested by the stream, Abigail felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. For all the uncertainty that lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: nothing could be worse than what she'd left behind. After a brief rest, they continued their journey, riding through the night to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Julesburg. Abigail was grateful for the strong horse beneath them and for Wyatt's solid presence at her back. Despite her initial suspicions, she found herself trusting him more with each passing mile. As dawn broke over the eastern plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Wyatt finally guided the horse off the trail toward a small copse of trees. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Both the horse and I need some sleep." Abigail hadn't realized how exhausted she was until the possibility of rest was mentioned. Her back ached from the hours in the saddle, and her eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. Wyatt efficiently set up a small camp, unrolling a bedroll for Abigail and laying his saddle blanket on the ground for himself. He built a small, smokeless fire and produced some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "It's not much," he apologized, offering her a share. "It's more than I expected," Abigail replied honestly, accepting the simple meal with gratitude. As they ate in companionable silence, she studied her rescuer more carefully. In the soft light of dawn, she could see that Wyatt was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his mid-20s. His hands were calloused from work, and a scar ran along his left forearm, visible where he'd rolled up his sleeves. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way some of the town boys had been, but there was something compelling about his weathered features and the quiet confidence with which he moved. "You said you have a brother in Fort Collins," she ventured, curious to learn more about him. "Is that where you're from originally?" Wyatt shook his head. "No, we grew up in Missouri, came west after the war. James fought for the Union. I was too young to enlist, but I saw enough of what that conflict did to people." His expression darkened momentarily. "James met Sarah in Denver, fell head over heels, and they started their ranch about 5 years ago. I help out when I can, but I'm not much for staying in one place too long." "A drifter, then," Abigail observed. "I prefer to think of myself as a man with a wide horizon," he replied with a small smile. "What about you, Miss Greenberg? You mentioned your father passed away." Abigail nodded, the familiar pain of loss rising in her chest. 3 years ago, pneumonia. "My mother died when I was 13, a fall from a horse." She twisted her hands in her lap. "After father died, everything went to Meredith. She made it clear I was nothing but a burden, useful only for chores and eventually to be married off to whoever would take me." "I'm sorry," Wyatt said simply, and the genuine compassion in his voice nearly broke her composure. "It doesn't matter now," she said quickly, blinking back unexpected tears. "I'm free of her, thanks to you." Wyatt looked as if he wanted to say more, but instead nodded toward the bedroll. "You should get some sleep. I'll keep watch for a while, then rest myself." Abigail was too tired to argue. She lay down on the bedroll, surprised by how quickly sleep claimed her, despite the strange circumstances and the hard ground beneath her. When she awoke, the sun was high in the sky and Wyatt was tending to his horse, checking its hooves and brushing its coat with gentle hands. He looked up as she stirred. "There's water in the canteen if you'd like to freshen up," he offered. "We should reach the next town by nightfall, where we can get proper supplies before heading to Fort Collins." Abigail ran a hand over her tangled hair, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She was still wearing the simple brown dress her stepmother had forced her to put on for the meeting, a dress that had seen better days and now bore the dust of their journey. "I must look a fright," she murmured. "You look like a woman who survived something difficult," Wyatt corrected her. "There's nothing frightful about that." The simple comment, delivered without flattery or condescension, touched Abigail deeply. She used a small amount of the precious water to wash her face and hands, then did her best to tidy her hair, securing it with the few pins that remained. They packed up the small camp efficiently, and soon they were on the trail again, Abigail once more seated in front of Wyatt on the chestnut horse. The day grew warm, the Colorado sun beating down on them as they traveled across the open plains. They spoke little, conserving energy and water, but the silence between them was surprisingly comfortable. By late afternoon, they crested a rise to see a small town in the distance, nestled in a valley alongside a river. "Riverdale," Wyatt informed her. "Not much to look at, but they have a general store and a decent inn. We can rest properly tonight, get you some supplies." Abigail nodded, relief flooding through her at the thought of a real bed and perhaps a bath. As they approached the town, however, anxiety began to gnaw at her. What if word had spread about her? What if Meredith had somehow telegraphed ahead, claiming Abigail was a runaway or worse, a thief? "Mr. Porter," she began hesitantly, "perhaps it would be better if I didn't go into town. If anyone is looking for me, Wyatt," he corrected gently. And don't worry, Riverdale is off the main line. News travels slowly here. Besides, we'll be husband and wife for the evening." Abigail turned to look at him sharply, and he quickly added, in name only, of course. "It's safer for a young woman to be traveling with her husband than alone with a strange man. We'll get separate rooms at the inn, but to everyone else, we're newlyweds heading to visit family." The logic was sound, but Abigail still felt her cheeks warm at the suggestion. "Very well, Wyatt." For appearance's sake. They rode into Riverdale as the sun was beginning to set, the small town coming alive with lamps being lit in windows and the sounds of a piano drifting from the local saloon. Wyatt guided his horse to a modest stable attached to an inn called the Riverside Rest, where a boy of about 15 came out to take the reins. "Evening, mister," the boy greeted them. "Just the one horse?" "Yes," Wyatt replied, dismounting before helping Abigail down. "Give him extra oats if you would. He's carried us far today." Wyatt kept his hand at the small of Abigail's back as they entered the inn, a gesture that was both protective and part of their charade. The proprietress, a plump woman with graying hair piled atop her head, looked up from her ledger as they approached. "Good evening," Wyatt said pleasantly. "My wife and I need lodging for the night. We're on our way to Fort Collins." The woman assessed them with shrewd eyes. "Newlyweds, by the looks of you. That'll be $2 for the night, including breakfast." Wyatt counted out the money while Abigail tried to look the part of a contented bride, smiling softly and staying close to him. "Rooms at the top of the stairs, first on the right," the proprietress said, handing Wyatt a key. "Supper's being served in the dining room for another hour if you're hungry." "Much obliged," Wyatt replied, guiding Abigail toward the stairs. Once inside the room, a simple but clean space with a large bed, washstand, and rocking chair, Abigail let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I'll sleep on the floor," Wyatt said immediately, setting down his saddlebags. "First, though, I thought we might get some supper, and then I'll visit the general store before it closes. You need proper traveling clothes and whatever else you might require." "I have no money," Abigail reminded him. "Consider it an advance on your wages at the ranch," Wyatt suggested. "You can pay me back once you start earning." It was a thoughtful solution that allowed her to maintain her dignity while acknowledging the reality of her situation. Abigail nodded gratefully. "Thank you, I won't forget this kindness." They went down to supper, where Wyatt continued their married charade with remarkable ease, pulling out her chair and referring to her as "my wife" when conversing with the other guests. Abigail found herself playing along, her hand occasionally brushing his across the table, her smile genuine as he recounted an embellished story of their courtship to an elderly couple seated nearby. After the meal, Wyatt excused himself to visit the general store, leaving Abigail to retire to their room. Alone, she took the opportunity to use the wash basin, scrubbing away as much of the trail dust as possible and longing for a proper bath. When Wyatt returned an hour later, his arms were laden with packages. "I wasn't sure what you might need," he admitted, setting them on the bed, "so I asked the shopkeeper's wife for guidance." Abigail opened the parcels to find practical items: a sturdy skirt and blouses, a warm shawl, undergarments which made her blush to think of him purchasing, a hairbrush, soap, and even a small bottle of rose water. The final package contained a pair of riding boots in what appeared to be her size. "How did you know?" she asked, holding up the boots in wonder. Wyatt shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've spent enough time around horses to gauge a person's size pretty accurately. If they don't fit, we can exchange them tomorrow before we leave." Abigail ran her fingers over the supple leather, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "No one has given me anything since my father died," she said softly. "They're practical, nothing more," Wyatt replied, though his eyes warmed at her evident pleasure. "You can't ride all the way to Fort Collins in those," he added, nodding toward her worn-out shoes. "Still, thank you." She gathered the items carefully. "I'll repay you for all of this." Wyatt waved away her words. "Get some rest, Abigail. Tomorrow will be another long day." True to his word, he made a pallet for himself on the floor, using his saddle as a pillow and his coat as a blanket. Abigail changed into one of the new nightgowns behind the privacy screen, then slipped into the bed, which felt luxuriously soft after the previous night on the ground. "Wyatt," she said into the darkness after blowing out the lamp. Came his drowsy reply. "Why are you really helping me? The truth, please." There was a long silence, and Abigail thought perhaps he had fallen asleep. Then his voice came, quiet and reflective. "I had a sister once, Emily. She was 16 when a man came through our town, charming and well-dressed. He promised her the world, and she believed him. By the time we realized she'd gone with him, it was too late." His voice hardened. 2 years later, I found her in a brothel in Kansas City. She didn't even recognize me at first, so broken was she by what had been done to her. I got her out, but..." He paused. "She took her own life 3 months later." Abigail's heart constricted painfully. "I'm so sorry. When I saw what your stepmother was doing selling you to a man with that look in his eyes, I saw Emily. And I couldn't stand by and let another young woman's life be destroyed if I could prevent it." The raw honesty in his voice moved Abigail deeply. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. "Get some sleep, Abigail," he said again, his voice gentle. "You're safe now." As she drifted off, Abigail realized that for the first time in years she truly felt safe, and it was all due to a stranger, a cowboy who had bought her freedom and asked nothing in return. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for traveling. Abigail dressed in her new clothes, marveling at how well they fit and how much more comfortable they were than the threadbare garments her stepmother had allowed her. The boots, too, were a perfect fit, as if they'd been made for her. When she emerged from behind the privacy screen, Wyatt was already dressed and ready, his bedroll neatly packed. He looked up as she appeared, and something flickered in his eyes, approval, perhaps, or simple appreciation. "Those suit you," he said simply. "Thank you again," Abigail replied, packing her few possessions into a small bundle. "I'm ready whenever you are." After a hearty breakfast in the inn's dining room, they checked out and retrieved Wyatt's horse from the stable. The chestnut seemed refreshed after a night of rest and good feed, nickering softly as Wyatt approached. "This is Thunder," Wyatt said, patting the horse's neck. "I figured it was time for a proper introduction, since you two will be spending a lot of time together over the next few days." Abigail smiled, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "He's beautiful." "And strong," Wyatt added. "He'll get us to Fort Collins without complaint, though I'd like to stop in at the livery stable before we leave town. Carrying double for so many miles isn't ideal for him." Abigail followed him to the livery stable, where Wyatt haggled briefly with the owner before purchasing a sturdy bay mare. "For you," he told Abigail, handing her the reins. "Every ranch hand needs a horse." "I can't accept this," Abigail protested, though her fingers already curled around the leather reins. "You're not accepting it, you're using it. The horse belongs to the ranch," Wyatt explained patiently. "Consider her part of your working equipment." Abigail wanted to argue further but recognized the logic in his words. Besides, the mare was nuzzling her shoulder affectionately, as if she'd already decided who her rider would be. "Does she have a name?" Abigail asked instead. "The stable owner called her Penny for her color," Wyatt replied, helping Abigail into the saddle. "But you can rename her if you like." "Penny suits her," Abigail decided, feeling a surge of joy as she settled onto the horse's back. It had been years since she'd ridden, but the familiar feeling returned quickly, her body remembering the proper posture and grip. They left Riverdale shortly after, riding side by side along the trail that would take them northwest toward Fort Collins. The day was pleasantly warm, and Abigail found herself enjoying the journey in a way she hadn't expected. Wyatt was a companionable travel partner, pointing out interesting landmarks and sharing stories of his adventures throughout the West. "Have you always been a cowboy?" she asked as they paused to rest the horses near midday. Wyatt chuckled. "I've been many things. Cowhand, gold prospector for a brief, unsuccessful period, scout for a cattle drive. I even tried my hand at being a shopkeeper's assistant, but standing still for that long nearly drove me mad." "And now," Abigail pressed, curious about this man who had so dramatically altered the course of her life. Now I do odd jobs, help out at my brother's ranch when he needs an extra hand, and generally try to be where I'm needed." He smiled slightly. "It's not a conventional life, but it suits me." "It sounds wonderful," Abigail said sincerely, "to be free to go where you please, to help where you can." Wyatt studied her thoughtfully. Most women wouldn't see it that way. They'd prefer security, a permanent home. Abigail shrugged. "Perhaps I'm not most women. Besides, what security did I have with my stepmother? At any moment, she could have done exactly what she tried to do, sell me to the highest bidder." Wyatt's expression darkened at the reminder. "No one will ever treat you that way again, Abigail, not while I draw breath." The fierceness of his declaration surprised her, and a warm feeling bloomed in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had cared what happened to her, let alone promised to protect her. They continued their journey, making good progress thanks to the fine weather and the well-maintained trail. By nightfall, they had covered a significant distance, and Wyatt suggested they make camp near a small creek. This time, Abigail insisted on helping set up the camp, gathering wood for the fire while Wyatt tended to the horses. She even surprised him by successfully starting the fire using the techniques her father had taught her years ago. "You're full of surprises, Miss Greenberg," Wyatt commented, genuine admiration in his voice as he returned to find the fire crackling merrily. "My father believed girls should know how to survive just as well as boys," she explained, carefully feeding small branches into the flames. "He taught me to ride, to fish, to build a fire. My stepmother thought it was scandalous and put a stop to the lessons after they married, but I remembered everything he showed me." "He sounds like a wise man," Wyatt said, settling beside her and pulling provisions from his saddlebags. "He was," Abigail agreed softly. "I miss him every day." They ate a simple meal of beans and bacon that Wyatt prepared, along with some biscuits purchased from the inn that morning. The food tasted better than anything Abigail could remember eating in recent memory, perhaps because it was seasoned with the spice of freedom. As they sat by the fire after eating, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, Abigail found herself studying Wyatt's profile. The firelight cast his features into sharp relief, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his right eyebrow, the surprisingly long lashes that shadowed his cheeks when he blinked. "Tell me about your brother's ranch," she requested, partly to distract herself from these observations and partly out of genuine curiosity about her future workplace. Wyatt leaned back, crossing his ankles and gazing into the flames. "It's a beautiful piece of land, about 5 miles outside Fort Collins. James calls it Evergreen Ranch because of the pine forests that border the property to the west. They raise cattle primarily, but Sarah keeps a vegetable garden and some chickens, and they've recently started breeding horses as well." "And you think they'll have work for me?" Abigail asked, trying not to sound anxious. "Without a doubt," Wyatt assured her. "Sarah's been wanting help with the house and garden for months now, especially since—" He paused, then smiled slightly. "Well, I'll let them share their news when we arrive." Abigail raised an eyebrow, intrigued but didn't press for details. "What are they like, your brother and his wife?" "James is the steady one of the family, always has been. He's a hard worker, fair-minded, and loyal to a fault. Sarah's a firecracker, smart as a whip, stubborn as a mule, and probably the best cook in 3 counties. Wyatt's affection for them was evident in his voice. "They'll welcome you, Abigail." "I have no doubt of that." The certainty with which he spoke eased some of the anxiety that had been building in Abigail's chest. Although Wyatt had shown her nothing but kindness, there was still the fear of the unknown, a new place, new people, new expectations. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything?" Wyatt nodded, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Get some rest, I'll take the first watch." Abigail curled up in the bedroll Wyatt had provided for her, listening to the nighttime sounds of the wilderness, the gentle rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft nickering of the horses. Despite the hard ground beneath her, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. Whatever lay ahead at Evergreen Ranch, it had to be better than what she'd left behind. The next 2 days passed in much the same manner, riding during daylight hours, making camp at night, sharing simple meals and quiet conversation. Abigail found herself growing increasingly comfortable in Wyatt's presence, and she noticed that he, too, seemed to relax more with each passing day, his smiles coming more easily, his laughter more frequent. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a hill to reveal a stunning vista of the foothills of the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. A sprawling valley spread out before them, and a neat collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of a pine forest. "Evergreen Ranch," Wyatt announced, a note of pride in his voice. "Home." Abigail drank in the sight eagerly. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a two-story structure with a wide porch wrapped around three sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property: a barn, a bunkhouse, what appeared to be a workshop, and several smaller cabins. Fields of grazing cattle stretched to the north, while to the south she could see fenced paddocks containing horses. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided shade and beauty. "It's lovely," she breathed, suddenly nervous about meeting the people who owned such a prosperous-looking operation. "Come on," Wyatt said, urging Thunder forward. "They'll be wondering who's coming up the drive." Sure enough, as they approached, Abigail could see a man step out onto the porch of the main house, shielding his eyes against the sun to better see the approaching riders. Even at a distance, she could tell he was Wyatt's brother. They shared the same tall, lean build, though this man's hair was a lighter brown. "Wyatt," the man called as they drew closer, his face breaking into a wide smile. He bounded down the porch steps just as they reached the yard. Wyatt dismounted in one fluid motion, grinning as he clasped his brother in a warm embrace. "James, good to see you, brother." "We weren't expecting you for another week at least," James said, clapping Wyatt on the shoulder before turning his curious gaze to Abigail, who remained atop Penny, uncertain of the protocol. Wyatt moved to help her dismount, his hands steady at her waist as he lifted her down. "James, this is Abigail Greenberg. Abigail, my brother, James Porter." James's eyes widened slightly as he took in the unexpected guest, but his smile remained welcoming. "Miss Greenberg, a pleasure to meet you." Before Abigail could respond, the front door opened again, and a woman hurried out, petite and pretty, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a noticeable roundness to her belly that suggested she was with child. "Wyatt Porter, you scoundrel," she exclaimed, her face alight with joy. "Why didn't you send word you were coming early?" Wyatt laughed, meeting her at the bottom of the steps to give her a gentle hug. "And miss the look on your face, Sarah." "Never." Sarah swatted his arm playfully before turning her attention to Abigail, curiosity and warmth mingling in her green eyes. "And who might this be?" "Abigail Greenberg," Wyatt replied, placing a reassuring hand at the small of Abigail's back. "She's looking for work, and I thought of you immediately." Sarah's face lit up. "Oh, well, that's fortunate timing." "As you can see," she gestured to her swollen belly, "I could certainly use an extra pair of hands around here." Abigail felt a wave of relief wash over her at the genuine welcome in Sarah's voice. "I'm a hard worker, Mrs. Porter. I can cook, clean, so whatever you need." "Call me Sarah, please," the woman insisted, taking Abigail's hand and squeezing it warmly. "And I have no doubt you'll be a godsend. Come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted after your journey." As they followed Sarah and James into the house, Wyatt leaned close to Abigail's ear. "Told you they'd welcome you," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, spacious and well-furnished, with polished wooden floors and large windows that let in plenty of light. A central staircase led to the upper floor, and several doorways opened off the main hallway. Sarah led them into a comfortable sitting room, gesturing for them to take seats while James poured drinks from a sideboard. "Now," she said, settling herself carefully into a rocking chair, "I want to hear everything. How did you two meet, and what brings you to Evergreen?" Abigail glanced at Wyatt, uncertain how much to reveal about their unusual circumstances. To her surprise, Wyatt didn't hesitate. "I found Miss Greenberg in a difficult situation in Julesburg," he explained, his voice matter of fact. "Her stepmother was attempting to sell her to a man of questionable character. I intervened, James and Sarah exchanged startled looks. Sell her, James repeated, his brow furrowing. Like property, Wyatt confirmed, a hint of the anger he'd felt that night returning to his voice. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. Sarah's expression softened as she looked at Abigail. You poor dear, what a terrible ordeal. Abigail straightened her shoulders, determined not to be pitied. I'm fortunate that your brother-in-law happened to be there, and now I'm hoping to make a fresh start if you'll have me. Of course we'll have you, Sarah said without hesitation. As I said, your timing couldn't be better. The baby is due in about 3 months, and there's so much to do before then. And after, James added with a smile, we've been meaning to hire help for Sarah for months now, but finding someone trustworthy has been a challenge. Abigail is more than trustworthy, Wyatt said confidently. She's resourceful, quick-thinking, and not afraid of hard work. Abigail felt her cheeks warm at his praise. You hardly know me, Mr. Porter. I'm a good judge of character, he replied, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Sarah watched this exchange with interest, a small smile playing at her lips. Well, that's settled then. Abigail will stay in the cabin by the vegetable garden. It's small but comfortable, and it will give you privacy while still being close enough to the main house. Thank you, Abigail said sincerely. I can start work immediately. Nonsense, Sarah waved away her offer. You'll rest today and tonight, get settled in your cabin, and we can discuss your duties tomorrow. James, why don't you show Wyatt to his usual room while I take Abigail to see her new home? As the men departed, Sarah linked her arm through Abigail's, leading her back outside and down a well-tended path toward a small cabin set among a grove of fruit trees. It's not fancy, Sarah warned as they approached, but it's clean and dry and has a good stove for heating. The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a bed, table, 2 chairs, a small dresser, and a pot-bellied stove, but it was immaculately maintained, with cheerful curtains at the windows and a colorful quilt on the bed. It's perfect, Abigail breathed, taking in what would be her first real home since her father's death. I can't thank you enough. Sarah squeezed her arm affectionately. No need for thanks. We're the grateful ones to have found help so unexpectedly. She paused, studying Abigail's face. Wyatt doesn't usually involve himself in other people's problems, not directly, at least. He must have seen something special in you. Abigail felt her cheeks grow warm again. He mentioned his sister, she said softly. I think he was trying to prevent a similar tragedy. Sarah's expression sobered. Emily, yes, that would explain it. He blamed himself for what happened to her, though there was nothing he could have done. He seems to have a habit of rescuing people, Abigail observed. Only those who truly need it, Sarah replied with a knowing look. And only those he believes are worth saving. Before Abigail could process the implications of that statement, Sarah was moving on, showing her the pump outside for water and pointing out the path to the main house. Supper will be ready in about an hour. Why don't you rest and freshen up and then join us? The washroom is through that door there. I had one of the hands fill the tub earlier, thinking Wyatt might want to wash off the trail dust, but you're welcome to use it first. Left alone in her new cabin, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. Just 4 days ago, she'd been a virtual prisoner in her stepmother's house, facing a horrifying fate. Now she was here in this beautiful place, with kind people who seemed genuinely pleased to have her. And then there was Wyatt. She couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when she thought of him, the way his blue eyes seemed to see right through her pretenses to the person beneath. It was foolish, she knew, to develop feelings for the man who had rescued her. Such things happened only in the dime novels her father used to read to her as a child. Besides, Wyatt himself had made it clear he wasn't one to stay in one place for long. The last thing she needed was to develop an attachment to someone who would inevitably leave. With that sobering thought, Abigail rose and began to unpack her meager possessions, determined to focus on the opportunity before her rather than the confusing feelings stirring in her heart. Supper that evening was a lively affair. In addition to James, Sarah, and Wyatt, there were 2 ranch hands who ate with the family: Miguel, a skilled horseman from New Mexico, and Caleb, a former soldier who now served as the ranch's foreman. All were welcoming to Abigail, asking polite questions about her journey and expressing outrage when Wyatt recounted how they'd met. "Your stepmother ought to be locked up," Caleb declared, his weathered face creased with indignation. "Selling a person it ain't right, not in this day and age." "Well, she's safe now," Sarah interjected, placing a protective hand over Abigail's. "And we're fortunate to have her here." The conversation turned to ranch business after that, with James updating Wyatt on the progress of the new breeding program and the upcoming cattle drive. Abigail listened attentively, trying to absorb as much information as possible about her new home. Throughout the meal, she found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Wyatt, who sat across from her at the large wooden table. He'd cleaned up since their arrival, his dark hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved except for the neatly trimmed mustache that framed his upper lip. He'd changed into clean clothes as well, a blue shirt that matched his eyes, dark trousers, and a vest that, while worn, was of good quality. Several times she looked up to find him watching her as well, his expression thoughtful. Each time their eyes met, Abigail felt a strange, fluttering sensation in her stomach, like butterflies taking flight. After the meal, the men retired to the porch with pipes and coffee, while Sarah showed Abigail around the kitchen, explaining where everything was kept and how she preferred things to be done. "I don't mean to overwhelm you on your first night," Sarah apologized, noticing Abigail stifling a yawn. "You must be exhausted after your journey. We can go over the rest tomorrow." "Thank you," Abigail said gratefully. "It's been a long few days." Sarah walked her back to the cabin, providing her with a lamp and making sure she had everything she needed for the night. "Sleep well, Abigail. And truly, we're so glad you're here." Left alone once more, Abigail prepared for bed, savoring the luxury of privacy and the knowledge that she was safe. As she drifted off to sleep in the comfortable bed, her last conscious thought was of Wyatt's smile as he'd introduced her to his family. For the first time in years, she felt as if she might have found a place where she belonged. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Abigail rose early, eager to begin her new duties. She dressed carefully in one of the practical outfits Wyatt had purchased for her in Riverdale, braided her hair neatly, and made her way to the main house just as the sun was clearing the eastern horizon. To her surprise, Wyatt was already on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. He turned as she approached, his face brightening at the sight of her. "You're up early," he commented, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Coffee." "Please," she accepted, settling into the chair. "I wanted to make a good impression on my first day." Wyatt poured her a cup from the pot on the small table between them, adding a splash of cream just as she liked it, a detail he'd noticed during their journey. "Sarah doesn't usually stir until around 7, he told her. "You've got some time yet." "And you?" Abigail asked, accepting the cup gratefully. "Why are you awake at this hour?" "Old habits," he shrugged. "I've never been one for sleeping late. Besides, dawn at Evergreen is worth witnessing." Abigail had to agree as she gazed out at the vista before them. The rising sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and pink, the dew on the grass sparkling like diamonds, and a gentle mist rising from the creek that wound through the property. "It's beautiful," she murmured, sipping her coffee. "Yes," Wyatt agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found he wasn't looking at the landscape but at her. The intensity of his gaze sent a flush of warmth through her body that had nothing to do with the hot coffee. Before she could respond, the front door opened and James emerged, looking surprised to find them both there. "Well, isn't this cozy?" he remarked with a knowing smile that made Abigail blush. Wyatt rolled his eyes at his brother. "Abigail was eager to start her first day," he explained. "I was merely keeping her company while she waited for Sarah." James hummed noncommittally, helping himself to coffee. "Well, since you're both up, you can help me with the morning chores. Sarah won't be down for at least another hour. The baby's been keeping her up at night." Abigail rose immediately. "I'd be happy to help. Just tell me what needs doing." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as James showed Abigail around the ranch, explaining the daily routines and introducing her to the various animals. Wyatt accompanied them, occasionally adding his own observations or demonstrating a particular task. By the time they returned to the house, Sarah was up and preparing breakfast, the delicious smell of bacon and biscuits wafting through the open windows. She welcomed Abigail warmly, putting her to work setting the table while she finished cooking. "How do you like Evergreen so far?" Sarah asked as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "It's wonderful," Abigail replied sincerely. "Everyone's been so kind and the land is breathtaking." Sarah smiled, her green eyes twinkling. "And my brother-in-law, has he been kind as well?" Abigail felt her cheeks warm. "Very kind, I owe him my life, really." "Wyatt has always had a good heart," Sarah said, turning back to the stove, "but he's also always had restless feet. Never stays in one place too long." The observation, though delivered casually, felt like a warning. Abigail nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, he mentioned that. I'm grateful he happened to be in Julesburg when he was." Sarah gave her a searching look but didn't press further. "Well, we're grateful too. Now, let's get this breakfast on the table before the men start gnawing on the furniture." The day passed quickly as Abigail familiarized herself with her new duties. Sarah was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, showing Abigail how she liked things done without making her feel inadequate. By supper time, Abigail felt as if she'd been at Evergreen for weeks rather than a single day. Wyatt, she noticed, spent much of the day with James, helping with various ranch tasks and discussing plans for expanding the operation. Several times, though, she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, a thoughtful expression on his face. After the evening meal, which Abigail helped prepare under Sarah's guidance, James announced that they would be having a small gathering the following Saturday. "Just a few neighbors and friends," he explained. "We do it every month or so, good for morale and for business. And it gives everyone a chance to meet our newest addition," Sarah added, smiling at Abigail. "Don't worry, they're all good people. You'll feel right at home." The prospect of meeting a group of strangers made Abigail nervous, but she nodded gamely. "I'll help with the preparations, of course." "We'll all help," Wyatt assured her. "Even James, though his idea of helping usually involves sampling everything before it's ready." James protested good-naturedly, and the evening dissolved into laughter and storytelling. Abigail found herself relaxing into the warm family atmosphere, contributing a few tales of her own childhood that had the others chuckling. As the evening wound down, Wyatt offered to walk Abigail back to her cabin. The night was clear, the stars sprinkled across the vast Colorado sky like diamonds on black velvet. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, and in the distance, an owl hooted softly. "You seem to be settling in well," Wyatt observed as they strolled down the path. "Everyone's been so welcoming," Abigail replied. "It's almost hard to believe after what your stepmother put you through," Wyatt finished when she trailed off. "Not everyone is like her, Abigail. Most folks are decent, given half a chance." "I'm beginning to see that," she admitted. "Your brother and Sarah, they didn't have to take in a complete stranger, yet they've treated me like family from the moment we arrived." "That's who they are," Wyatt said simply. "Good people who see the good in others." They reached her cabin, and Abigail turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the starlight. "And you, do you see the good in others, Wyatt?" His eyes met hers, and something in their depths made her breath catch. "In some," he said softly. "In you, most definitely." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an energy Abigail had never experienced before. For a moment, she thought Wyatt might lean in, might close the small distance between them, but instead he took a step back, clearing his throat. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Sarah will have a full day planned for you tomorrow, I'm sure." Disappointed but not entirely surprised, Abigail nodded. "Good night, Wyatt, and thank you again for everything." "Good night, Abigail," he replied, tipping his hat slightly before turning to walk back toward the main house, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Abigail watched him go, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. There was no denying her attraction to Wyatt, but Sarah's words echoed in her mind. He's always had restless feet, never stays in one place too long. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a man who would inevitably move on, leaving her behind. With a small sigh, she entered her cabin, determined to focus on the opportunity she'd been given rather than the complicated feelings Wyatt Porter stirred in her heart. The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Abigail rose early each morning, joining Sarah in the kitchen to prepare breakfast for the household, then helping with various chores throughout the day: laundry, cleaning, gardening, and learning to cook Sarah's special recipes. In the evenings, she often joined the family in the sitting room, listening to James read from the newspaper or helping Sarah with her knitting for the baby. Wyatt, she noticed, seemed to be spending more time at the ranch than usual, according to comments James occasionally made. He worked alongside the ranch hands during the day, helping with the cattle and the horses, repairing fences, and even building a new shed near the barn. At mealtimes, he was unfailingly polite to Abigail, engaging her in conversation and ensuring she was included in family discussions. But he maintained a certain distance, as if cautious about getting too close. On Thursday afternoon, Sarah sent Abigail into town with a list of supplies needed for Saturday's gathering. "Take Penny," she insisted. "The wagon's too unwieldy for just you, and it's only a few items." "I can go with her," Wyatt offered, looking up from the boot he was mending on the porch. "I have business in town anyway." Sarah raised an eyebrow but nodded. "That would be perfect. You can show Abigail around Fort Collins a bit while you're there." And so Abigail found herself riding alongside Wyatt into town, the warm summer air fragrant with wildflowers and the sound of birds accompanying their journey. Fort Collins was larger than she'd expected: a proper town with several streets of businesses, a school, churches, and neat houses with well-tended gardens. Wyatt gave her an informal tour, pointing out landmarks and introducing her to several shopkeepers who greeted him warmly. "Wyatt Porter," the owner of the general store exclaimed as they entered. "Twice in 1 month, the world must be ending," Wyatt chuckled, shaking the man's hand. "Just accompanying Miss Greenberg here. She's working for James and Sarah now." The shopkeeper, a portly man with a jovial face, turned to Abigail with interest. "Is that so? Well, any friend of the Porters is welcome here. What can I help you with today, Miss Greenberg?" Abigail presented Sarah's list, and the shopkeeper began gathering the items while she and Wyatt browsed the store. It was well stocked, with everything from basic necessities to small luxuries, and Abigail found herself lingering over a display of ribbons and lace, running her fingers over the delicate materials. "See something you like?" Wyatt asked, coming to stand beside her. Abigail withdrew her hand quickly, embarrassed to be caught admiring something so frivolous. "No, I was just looking. Sarah's list is very specific." Wyatt's eyes crinkled at the corners. "That doesn't mean you can't have something for yourself. You've been working hard all week." "I haven't earned enough yet to be spending money on trinkets," Abigail protested. "Consider it a welcome gift then," Wyatt insisted, gesturing to the display. "Choose something." Feeling both embarrassed and pleased, Abigail selected a simple blue ribbon that matched her eyes. "Just this, then." "Thank you." Wyatt paid for the ribbon along with Sarah's supplies, despite Abigail's protests that James should be billed for the household items. "My brother won't miss the money," he assured her. "Besides, I still owe him for a poker game last Christmas." With their purchases secured in Abigail's saddlebags, Wyatt suggested they stop for coffee at the small cafe before heading back to the ranch. The cafe was cozy and clean, with checkered tablecloths and fresh flowers on each table. They were seated by a window overlooking the main street where they could watch the comings and goings of the townsfolk. "Is this your business in town?" Abigail asked as they waited for their coffee. "Coffee and a tour," Wyatt smiled, his blue eyes warming. "My business can wait." "I thought you might enjoy seeing where you'll be doing the shopping from now on." "It's a lovely town," Abigail observed. "Much nicer than Julesburg." "Most places are," Wyatt agreed dryly. Their coffee arrived, along with a plate of fresh baked cookies that the waitress insisted were on the house for Wyatt Porter and his lady friend. The comment made Abigail blush, but Wyatt merely thanked the woman without correcting her assumption. "You seem to be well known here," Abigail remarked after the waitress had gone. "I've been coming to Fort Collins for years," Wyatt explained, adding cream to his coffee. "And people tend to remember the Porter name because of James and the ranch. He's well respected in these parts." "You sound proud of him," Abigail noted. "I am. He's built something remarkable out of nothing." Wyatt took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. Not many men could have done what he did, especially after the war. Was it very difficult for him? Abigail asked, curious about the family's history. Wyatt nodded slowly. "The war changed him, as it did most who fought. He came back, different, haunted. It was Sarah who brought him back to himself, gave him purpose again." He smiled slightly. "She's a force of nature, my sister-in-law." "She certainly is," Abigail agreed, thinking of the petite woman's boundless energy despite her advancing pregnancy. "I'm grateful to both of them for taking me in." "They're the ones who are grateful," Wyatt assured her. "Sarah's been needing help for months, and with the baby coming." He trailed off, and Abigail studied him curiously. "Will you stay? For the baby's birth, I mean." Wyatt looked surprised by the question. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. I usually don't stay more than a week or two at a time." "Why not?" The question slipped out before Abigail could stop it. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "I've never been good at staying in one place," he said finally. "There's always another horizon to chase, another adventure waiting." "That sounds lonely," Abigail observed softly. His eyes met hers, and something in them made her heart flutter. "It can be," he admitted, "but it's the life I've chosen, or the life that chose you," Abigail suggested. "After Emily." Wyatt's expression shuddered slightly at the mention of his sister. "Perhaps, does it matter?" "I suppose not," Abigail conceded. "We all do what we must to survive our past." "And what are you doing to survive yours?" Wyatt asked, his gaze intent. Abigail considered the question seriously. "Learning to trust again, I think, to believe that not everyone is like my stepmother. That some people are genuinely kind without expecting anything in return. Like James and Sarah." "Like them," Abigail agreed, "and like you." Wyatt looked away, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Abigail contradicted him gently. "You did what few would have done. Most would have walked away, not wanting to get involved. You spent $100 to free a stranger, asked nothing in return, and brought me to a safe place where I could start over. That's not ordinary kindness, Wyatt." He was saved from responding by the return of the waitress, who refilled their coffee cups and chatted briefly about the upcoming summer festival in town. By the time she left, the moment for such personal conversation had passed, and they finished their coffee discussing more mundane topics. The ride back to Evergreen was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch, Abigail broke the silence. "Thank you for today, for showing me the town, and for the ribbon." Wyatt smiled, the setting sun gilding his features with gold. "You're welcome, it was my pleasure." Something in his voice, in the way his eyes lingered on her face, gave Abigail hope that perhaps Wyatt Porter wasn't as determined to move on as he claimed to be. It was a dangerous hope, one that could lead to heartache. But as they rode side by side into the ranch yard, Abigail couldn't help but nurture it anyway. Saturday arrived with perfect weather for the gathering sunny, but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of Sarah's roses throughout the ranch. Abigail had been up since dawn, helping with preparations, baking pies and bread, preparing salads, and setting up tables on the wide porch and in the yard. Sarah had insisted Abigail wear one of her own dresses for the occasion, a pretty blue calico that matched the ribbon Wyatt had bought her. "It's a little loose because of my condition," Sarah had said, pinning the dress to fit Abigail's slimmer figure, "but with these adjustments it should do nicely. You can't meet everyone in your work clothes." Abigail had protested weakly, but secretly she was pleased with the transformation. The blue of the dress brought out the color in her eyes, and with her hair arranged in a becoming style with the ribbon woven through it, she looked better than she had in years. Wyatt's reaction when she emerged from helping Sarah dress confirmed the improvement. He was on the porch talking with James, but he stopped mid-sentence when he saw her, his eyes widening slightly. "You look lovely, Abigail," James said warmly, nudging his brother when Wyatt remained silent. "Yes," Wyatt agreed, seeming to recover himself. "That color suits you." The simple compliment, delivered in his deep voice, made Abigail blush with pleasure. "Thank you. Sarah was kind enough to lend me the dress." "It looks better on you than it ever did on me," Sarah declared, emerging from the house in a green dress that accommodated her growing belly. "Now the guests will be arriving soon. Abigail, would you help me bring out the lemonade?" The afternoon unfolded pleasantly as neighbors and friends arrived, each warmly welcomed by James and Sarah. Abigail was introduced again and again, and though she felt shy at first, the genuine friendliness of the guests soon put her at ease. There was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow who lived on the adjacent property, the Hendersons, who owned the largest ranch in the county, Dr. Williams and his wife from town, and numerous other families from the surrounding area. Throughout it all, Wyatt stayed close by, quietly introducing her to people he knew and ensuring she wasn't overwhelmed by the attention. His presence was reassuring, and Abigail found herself increasingly comfortable as the afternoon progressed. Music started up after the meal, a fiddle played by one of the ranch hands and a guitar skillfully handled by Mr. Henderson's son. People began to clear a space in the yard for dancing, and James led Sarah out for the first dance, her pregnancy not hindering her grace as they moved together. Abigail watched from the sidelines, smiling at the obvious affection between the couple. She was so engrossed in watching them that she didn't notice Wyatt approach until he was standing beside her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Greenberg?" he asked formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied the formality of his words. Abigail hesitated, suddenly nervous. "I haven't danced in years," she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how." "It's not something you forget," Wyatt assured her, holding out his hand. "Besides, I'm not much of a dancer myself. We can be awkward together." The self-deprecating humor made her smile, and she placed her hand in his. "Very well, Mr. Porter, I accept." Wyatt led her to the improvised dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while holding her other hand in his. The music shifted to a slower tune, and they began to move together, a bit stiffly at first but with increasing confidence as they found their rhythm. "See, not forgotten after all," Wyatt murmured, guiding her through a turn. He was right. The steps came back to her easily, memories of dancing with her father at community gatherings before his marriage to Meredith. But this was different. Wyatt's hand at her waist was warm and strong, his blue eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, and the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him was intoxicating in its own right. "You were right," she conceded. "Though I'm sure I'm not as graceful as I once was." "You're perfect," Wyatt said simply, and something in his voice told her he wasn't just referring to her dancing. The music continued, and they danced another dance and then another, until Abigail lost track of time and of everyone around them. It felt as if they were in their own world, connected by the music and by something deeper that neither of them had acknowledged. When they finally stepped off the dance floor, both a little breathless, Sarah approached with a knowing smile. "You two make a handsome couple," she observed, her eyes twinkling. "I haven't seen Wyatt dance in years, Abigail. You must have cast quite a spell on my brother-in-law." Abigail blushed, not knowing how to respond, but Wyatt came to her rescue. "Abigail was kind enough to save me from Mrs. Thompson, who was eyeing me from across the yard," he said lightly. "I owe her my gratitude." Sarah clearly didn't believe this explanation for a moment, but she played along. "Well, in that case, perhaps you could show your gratitude by fetching Abigail some refreshment. She must be parched after all that dancing." "With pleasure," Wyatt agreed, moving off toward the drinks table. As soon as he was out of earshot, Sarah took Abigail's arm, leaning in conspiratorially. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you," she said softly. "Not in all the years I've known him." "I'm sure you're mistaken," Abigail protested, though her heart leaped at the suggestion. He sees me as someone he helped, nothing more. Sarah's green eyes were knowing. If you believe that, you haven't been paying attention. Wyatt may fancy himself a drifter, but I think he's finally found a reason to stay put. Before Abigail could respond, Wyatt returned with 2 glasses of lemonade, and Sarah excused herself with a meaningful look that Abigail tried to ignore. "Your sister-in-law has quite an imagination," Abigail remarked as they moved to sit on a bench beneath one of the large oak trees. "Oh," Wyatt handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers in the process. "What has she been saying now?" Abigail took a sip of her lemonade, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "Nothing of consequence, she's very kind." Wyatt studied her face, clearly sensing there was more to the story, but he didn't press. Instead, he said, "You seem to be fitting in well here. Everyone speaks highly of you." "I've only been here a week," Abigail reminded him. "Sometimes a week is all it takes to know where you belong," Wyatt said quietly. The words hung between them, laden with meaning that Abigail wasn't sure how to interpret. Did he mean that she belonged at Evergreen? Or was there a deeper implication that she belonged with him? Before she could find the courage to ask, they were interrupted by James, who needed Wyatt's help with one of the guests' horses that had gotten loose. The moment passed, and for the rest of the afternoon, Abigail found herself swept up in the festivities, helping Sarah with various hosting duties and getting to know the neighbors better. By the time the last guest departed as the sun was setting, Abigail was exhausted but happy. She had been fully accepted by the community, with several invitations to visit neighbors and even a request from Mrs. Henderson to share her recipe for apple pie. "That went well," Sarah declared as they cleared the last of the dishes from the tables. "Everyone loved you, Abigail." "They were all very kind," Abigail agreed, stacking plates carefully. "Especially Wyatt," Sarah couldn't resist adding, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. "He was being polite, that's all." Sarah hummed skeptically. "Is that why he couldn't take his eyes off you all afternoon? Or why he danced with you 4 times when he usually avoids dancing altogether?" "Sarah," James called from the porch, saving Abigail from having to respond, "come tell Wyatt he's wrong about the new breeding pair." "He thinks the bay mare is too skittish." Sarah rolled her eyes affectionately. "Duty calls. Those 2 have been arguing about horses since they were boys." She squeezed Abigail's arm before moving away. "Think about what I said, though. I know my brother-in-law, and I've never seen him like this." Left alone with the dishes, Abigail couldn't help but dwell on Sarah's words. Was it possible that Wyatt felt the same attraction she did? And even if he did, what did it matter? He had made it clear that he wasn't one to stay in one place for long. Any feelings that developed between them would only lead to heartache when he inevitably moved on. With that sobering thought, Abigail finished cleaning up and headed to her cabin, too tired to join the family for a nightcap, as James had suggested. Tomorrow was Sunday, their day of rest, and she intended to use it to regain her equilibrium and remind herself why she was at Evergreen to work, to save money, to build a life for herself. Not to fall in love with a man whose heart belonged to the open road. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm, and Abigail rose with the sun, despite having permission to sleep in. She dressed simply in one of her everyday dresses, braided her hair, and decided to take a walk around the property before breakfast. The ranch was peaceful in the early morning light, with only the sounds of birds and the occasional lowing of cattle to break the silence. She found herself drawn to the creek that ran through the property, following its winding path away from the main house and into a small copse of trees where the water pooled into a deep, clear basin before continuing its journey. It was a beautiful spot, secluded and serene, with wildflowers dotting the banks and the gentle sound of water over rocks creating a soothing melody. Abigail sat on a fallen log, slipping off her shoes to dangle her feet in the cool water. She closed her eyes, tilting her face up to catch the sunlight filtering through the leaves above, and for a moment she felt perfectly at peace. "It's my favorite spot on the ranch," came Wyatt's voice, startling her from her reverie. Abigail opened her eyes to find him standing a few yards away, as if hesitant to intrude on her solitude. He was dressed casually in a clean shirt and trousers, his hat in his hands rather than on his head, and his dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it. "I can see why," she replied, gesturing to the space beside her on the log. "It's peaceful." Wyatt approached, sitting down with a respectful distance between them. "I used to come here to think when I was younger. James and I would spend summers at our uncle's ranch not far from here, and I'd sneak away to find spots like this." "And what would you think about?" Abigail asked, curious about this glimpse into his past. Wyatt smiled slightly. "Adventure, mostly. I was always dreaming of what lay beyond the next hill, the next town." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. James was the practical one, learning everything he could about ranching, planning his future. "I just wanted to see what was out there. And have you?" "Seen what's out there, I mean?" "Some of it," Wyatt admitted. "Enough to know that most places aren't so different from the last. People are the same wherever you go, some good, some bad, most just trying to get by as best they can." "Yet you keep moving," Abigail observed quietly. Wyatt was silent for a moment, then surprised her by saying, "Not always by choice." Abigail turned to look at him, finding his blue eyes already on her face. "What do you mean?" he sighed, tossing the stone into the creek where it landed with a small splash. "After Emily. I couldn't stay in one place. Every town, every face reminded me of what I'd lost, of how I'd failed her. Moving became a way to outrun the guilt, I suppose." "But you couldn't outrun it," Abigail guessed softly. "No," Wyatt agreed, a sad smile touching his lips. "It comes with me wherever I go. But recently, I've been thinking that maybe it's time to stop running." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with possibility. Abigail's heart beat faster as she asked, "What changed?" Wyatt's eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw a vulnerability she'd never expected from this strong, capable man. "I think you know," he said simply. Before Abigail could respond, could even begin to process what he might be implying, they were interrupted by the sound of a dinner bell from the direction of the main house. "That'll be Sarah calling us for breakfast," Wyatt said, breaking the moment. He stood, offering Abigail his hand. "We should go." Abigail took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet, but she didn't release it once she was standing. Instead, she held on, looking up at him with determination. "Wyatt, what were you trying to say just now?" He hesitated, and for a moment, Abigail thought he might not answer. Then he took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around hers. "I've been thinking that maybe there's a reason I was in Julesburg that night, that maybe some journeys are meant to end where they begin." "And where did your journey begin?" Abigail asked, barely daring to breathe. "With a young woman who needed help," Wyatt answered, his voice rough with emotion. "A woman who's shown me that maybe there's something worth staying for after all." Abigail's heart soared at his words, but caution held her back from reading too much into them. "Wyatt, I don't want your pity or your sense of obligation. It's not pity," he interrupted firmly, "and it's not obligation, it's—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It's admiration for your courage, respect for your determination. And something else that I can't quite name yet, but that keeps me waking up each morning eager to see your face." The dinner bell rang again, more insistently this time, and Wyatt sighed. "We should go before Sarah sends out a search party, but Abigail," he squeezed her hand gently, "I'd like to continue this conversation later." She nodded, her mind whirling with the implications of what he'd said. "Later," she agreed. They walked back to the house hand in hand, separating only as they approached the porch where James and Sarah were waiting. Abigail noticed Sarah's knowing smile as they arrived together, but she was too preoccupied with her own thoughts to be embarrassed. The day passed in a pleasant haze of shared meals, conversation, and relaxation, a true day of rest after the busy week. In the afternoon, Sarah insisted on resting, and James retreated to his study to catch up on correspondence, leaving Abigail and Wyatt to their own devices. "Would you like to see the new foals?" Wyatt suggested. "They were born while I was away, and I haven't had a chance to visit them properly yet." Abigail readily agreed, and they walked together to the paddock where the mares and their offspring grazed peacefully. The foals were delightful, spindly-legged and curious, with soft muzzles that nuzzled their hands in search of treats. "They're beautiful," Abigail said as one of the foals, a dappled gray with a white star on its forehead, approached her cautiously. "Like their mothers," Wyatt agreed, watching as the foal sniffed Abigail's outstretched hand before allowing her to stroke its neck. "You have a way with them. Most people don't earn their trust so quickly." "My father raised horses," Abigail explained, smiling as the foal leaned into her touch. "I used to help him train them before." She trailed off, not wanting to revisit painful memories. "Before your stepmother put an end to it," Wyatt finished for her, understanding in his eyes. "What was your father like?" The question surprised Abigail, but she found she wanted to share this part of herself with Wyatt. He was kind and patient, and believed that girls could do anything boys could if given the chance. "He taught me to ride astride rather than side saddle, scandalizing half the town." She smiled at the memory. He loved animals, especially horses, and could gentle even the most skittish colt with just his voice and his touch. "He sounds like a remarkable man," Wyatt observed. "He was," Abigail agreed softly. "I miss him every day." "What was his name?" "Thomas." "Thomas Greenberg." Abigail stroked the foal's soft muzzle. "He would have loved this place. And he would be proud of you," Wyatt said with certainty. "You've shown incredible strength, Abigail. Lesser people would have broken under what you've endured." She looked up at him, touched by his words. "I nearly did break if you hadn't come along when you did." "But I did," Wyatt said simply, "and here we are." "Here we are," she echoed, aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth in his blue eyes as they gazed down at her. The foal between them shifted, moving back toward its mother, leaving them facing each other with nothing between them but the charged air. Wyatt took a step closer, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Abigail," he began, his voice low and serious. "Yes," she whispered, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. "I've been thinking about what I said earlier by the creek," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "About having a reason to stay." Abigail nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "The truth is, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you," Wyatt admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "From the moment I saw you in that saloon in Julesburg, something changed for me. I didn't recognize it at first, thought it was just anger at your situation or a desire to help because of Emily, but it's more than that." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for his next words. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Greenberg. And it terrifies me because I've spent years avoiding attachments, avoiding anything that might make me want to stay in one place. But when I think about riding away from Evergreen now, about not seeing your face each morning." He shook his head. "I can't imagine it." Abigail felt tears welling in her eyes at his confession. "I feel the same way," she admitted softly, "but I've been afraid to say it, to even think it. You've made it clear that you don't stay anywhere long, and I couldn't bear to care for you only to watch you leave." Wyatt's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle. "I can't promise I won't ever feel the urge to see what's beyond the next horizon," he said honestly, "but I can promise that if you'll have me, I'll always come back to you. And maybe, with time, the horizons that matter most will be the ones I see in your eyes each morning." It was the most beautiful declaration Abigail had ever heard, all the more powerful for its honesty. Without hesitation, she rose on tiptoe, closing the distance between them to press her lips to his in a kiss that was both a question and an answer. Wyatt's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Is that a yes?" he murmured. Abigail laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes. Yes to all of it, to giving this a chance, to seeing where it leads, to believing that some journeys do end where they begin." Wyatt captured her lips in another kiss, this one deeper and more assured, sealing their newfound understanding with a promise that needed no words. When they separated, he kept her close within the circle of his arms, as if reluctant to let go now that he had found her. "What happens now?" Abigail asked, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. Now, Wyatt said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, we take each day as it comes. I'll stay at Evergreen for as long as you'll have me, helping James with the ranch and… He hesitated, then finished softly, courting you properly if that's what you want. Abigail looked up at him, her heart full to bursting with happiness she had never expected to find. That's exactly what I want. As they walked back to the main house hand in hand, Abigail felt as if she were floating rather than walking. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been trapped in a life of misery, with no hope of escape. Now, thanks to a cowboy with kind eyes and a brave heart, she had not only found freedom but also the promise of a love she had never dared to dream of. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and she had no illusions that there would be none, they would face them together. And that, Abigail thought as Wyatt squeezed her hand gently, was worth more than all the freedom in the world. The next few weeks passed in a blissful haze for Abigail. Her duties at the ranch continued, helping Sarah with household tasks, tending the vegetable garden, learning to make cheese from the milk of the ranch's small herd of dairy cows, but now there was an added dimension to her days. Wyatt was a constant presence, finding reasons to be near her whenever possible, stealing moments for conversation, a touch, a kiss. Their courtship was conducted largely in full view of James and Sarah, who made no effort to hide their approval. "About time my brother settled down," James remarked one evening as they watched Wyatt and Abigail walking together along the creek after supper. "And I can't think of anyone better for him than Abigail." Sarah, whose pregnancy was now entering its final weeks, agreed wholeheartedly. "They balance each other perfectly. She gives him a reason to stay, and he gives her the confidence to spread her wings." July turned to August, the summer days long and warm, filled with work and laughter and the gradual deepening of feelings between Abigail and Wyatt. They rode together in the mornings before the heat of the day set in, Abigail on Penny and Wyatt on Thunder, exploring the vast reaches of the ranch and the surrounding countryside. During these rides, they talked of everything and nothing, their pasts, their hopes, their fears, building a foundation of understanding that strengthened their bond. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch after supper, sometimes with James and Sarah, sometimes alone, watching the sun set over the mountains and the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. Occasionally, Wyatt would bring out his harmonica, a skill Abigail hadn't known he possessed, and play soft, haunting melodies that seemed to capture the beauty and melancholy of the West. On one such evening in mid-August, as they sat together on the porch swing, Wyatt surprised Abigail with a gift, a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a piece of string. "What's this for?" she asked, turning the package over in her hands. "Just because," Wyatt replied with a smile. "Open it." Abigail carefully untied the string and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver locket, simple but elegant, with a delicate chain. "Wyatt," she breathed, lifting the locket from the box. "It's beautiful." "Open it," he encouraged, his eyes warm as he watched her face. Abigail carefully pried open the locket to find a tiny photograph inside, not of Wyatt, as she had half expected, but of a middle-aged couple, the woman bearing a striking resemblance to Abigail herself. "My parents," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "How did you?" "I wrote to the sheriff in Julesburg," Wyatt explained. "Asked if there might be any personal effects of your father's that Meredith hadn't disposed of. He found this photograph in a book that had belonged to Thomas Greenberg. Apparently, Meredith had no interest in your father's library and had stored the books in the attic." Abigail stared at the tiny image, her heart full of emotion. "This is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me," she said, her voice choked with tears. "I have no words to thank you." Wyatt took the locket from her trembling hands, gently fastening it around her neck. "Your happiness is all the thanks I need," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Abigail touched the locket where it rested against her skin, feeling as if a piece of her past that had been lost had suddenly been restored. "I love you, Wyatt Porter," she said, the words coming naturally, without hesitation. It was the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud, though the feeling had been growing between them for weeks. Wyatt's eyes widened slightly, then softened with an emotion so deep it took her breath away. "And I love you, Abigail Greenberg," he replied, drawing her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their declaration and promised so much more. 2 days later, Sarah went into labor a week earlier than expected. The ranch burst into activity, James riding into town to fetch the doctor, Wyatt preparing the wagon in case they needed to transport Sarah to town, and Abigail helping the increasingly uncomfortable Sarah walk around the bedroom to ease the contractions. "First babies often take their time," Sarah assured Abigail, pausing to breathe through a particularly strong contraction. "But this little one seems eager to meet the world." Dr. Williams arrived within 2 hours, his bag in hand and his manner calm and confident. He examined Sarah, pronounced everything progressing normally, and then asked everyone except Abigail to leave the room. "I'll need an assistant," he explained to James, who was reluctant to leave his wife's side. "And it's better if it's a woman. Don't worry, I'll call you as soon as there's news." The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the afternoon and into the night. Abigail stayed by Sarah's side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, offering words of encouragement as the pains grew stronger and closer together. Dr. Williams remained calm, his experienced hands guiding Sarah through the process with reassuring competence. Just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains, Sarah gave a final, exhausted push, and the room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn baby. "It's a boy, Doctor," Williams announced, quickly cleaning the squalling infant before placing him on Sarah's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Sarah's face, despite her exhaustion, was radiant as she gazed down at her child. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "We've been waiting for you." Abigail felt her own eyes grow damp at the sight of mother and child, the miracle of new life overwhelming in its beauty and simplicity. "He's perfect," she said softly, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Absolutely perfect." "Go tell James," Sarah instructed, her voice weak but happy. "Tell him he has a son." Abigail nodded and slipped from the room to find James pacing the hallway, his face drawn with worry. Wyatt was seated on a bench nearby, his head in his hands, but he looked up sharply as the door opened. "A boy," Abigail announced, her smile wide. "Mother and child are both doing well." James let out a whoop of joy, embracing Abigail spontaneously before rushing past her into the bedroom to meet his son. Wyatt approached more slowly, his eyes searching her face. "You look exhausted," he observed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Abigail leaned into his touch, suddenly aware of how tired she truly was after the long night. "It was worth every moment," she assured him. "You should see him, Wyatt. He's beautiful, has James's chin and Sarah's eyes." Wyatt smiled, drawing her into his arms. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her hair. "Incredible, actually. Sarah couldn't have had a better support through this." Abigail rested her head on his chest, allowing herself to savor the moment of closeness after the intensity of the birth. "I think I'll sleep for a week," she admitted with a small laugh. "Then sleep you shall," Wyatt declared, scooping her up into his arms despite her protests. "I'm taking you to your cabin and you're going to rest. The rest of us can manage for a day without you." Too tired to argue, Abigail allowed herself to be carried from the house and across the yard to her small cabin. Wyatt deposited her gently on the bed, removing her shoes and covering her with a light blanket. "Sleep well," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll check on you later." Abigail was asleep before he reached the door, exhaustion claiming her completely. When she awoke, the sun was high in the sky, indicating it was well past noon. She felt refreshed, if still a bit tired, and quickly washed and changed before heading back to the main house. She found Sarah resting in bed, the baby sleeping peacefully in a cradle beside her. James was nowhere to be seen, presumably attending to ranch business now that the excitement was over. "How are you feeling?" Abigail asked, taking a seat beside the bed. Sarah smiled, looking tired but radiant. "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle, but happier than I've ever been." Have you seen him properly yet? In the light of day, Abigail moved to the cradle, gazing down at the sleeping infant. His tiny face was peaceful in sleep, his little fists curled up beside his chin. "He's beautiful," she said softly. "Have you decided on a name?" "Thomas," Sarah replied, watching Abigail's face carefully. "Thomas Wyatt Porter, if that's all right with you." Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes at the unexpected honor. "After my father." "Sarah, you don't have to, we want to," Sarah assured her. "James and I discussed it weeks ago. Your father sounds like he was a wonderful man and—" She hesitated, then continued more softly, "and we hope that one day you'll be part of this family officially." It seemed fitting. The implication of her words was clear, and Abigail felt a rush of happiness mingled with uncertainty. "Has Wyatt said something to you?" Sarah's smile was knowing. "He doesn't have to. I have eyes, Abigail. My brother-in-law is head over heels in love with you, and unless I'm very much mistaken, you feel the same way about him." Abigail couldn't deny it. "I do love him," she admitted. "More than I thought possible, but we haven't discussed the future." "He will," Sarah said confidently. "Wyatt may have spent years avoiding attachments, but once he commits to something or someone, he's steadfast. You'll see." As if summoned by their conversation, the bedroom door opened quietly and Wyatt peeked in. "Is it safe to enter?" he asked with a smile. "Of course," Sarah waved him in. "Come meet your nephew." Wyatt approached the cradle with a mixture of awe and trepidation on his face. He had confessed to Abigail during one of their evening conversations that he had little experience with babies and wasn't entirely sure how to interact with them. "Would you like to hold him?" Abigail offered, already reaching for the infant. Wyatt looked momentarily panicked but nodded bravely. "If you'll show me how." Abigail carefully lifted baby Thomas from the cradle, cradling him securely before transferring him to Wyatt's arms. "Support his head like this," she instructed, guiding Wyatt's hands into the proper position. "There you go, you're a natural." Wyatt gazed down at the tiny face, his expression softening into one of wonder. "Hello, little man," he said softly. "Welcome to the family." Something about the sight of Wyatt holding the newborn stirred a deep longing in Abigail's heart, a vision of a possible future, one with a home and family of her own. It was a dream she had set aside years ago, believing it to be out of reach after her father's death and her stepmother's cruelty. But now, watching Wyatt with his nephew, the dream seemed not only possible but tantalizingly close. Over the next week, life at Evergreen settled into a new rhythm, centered around the newest member of the Porter family. Abigail divided her time between helping Sarah with the baby and maintaining the household, while James and Wyatt handled the ranch operations and began preparations for the fall cattle drive. One evening in late August, as Abigail was hanging laundry to dry behind her cabin, Wyatt approached, his expression unusually serious. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked. "Of course," Abigail replied, pinning the last sheet to the line. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong," Wyatt assured her, taking her hand and leading her to the small bench outside her cabin door. "I just need to tell you something important." Abigail felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach as they sat down. Despite their deepening relationship, a part of her still feared that Wyatt would eventually feel the pull of the open road again, that the restlessness that had driven him for years would return, taking him away from Evergreen and from her. "James has asked me to lead the cattle drive to Cheyenne next month," Wyatt began, confirming her worst fears. "It's a 2-week journey, maybe longer if the weather turns." Abigail tried to hide her disappointment. "I see, when would you leave?" "Mid-September," Wyatt replied, watching her face closely. "But that's not all I wanted to discuss." Abigail waited, her heart pounding. "I've been thinking about the future," Wyatt continued, his voice growing softer. "About what I want, where I want to be." He paused, taking both her hands in his. "For years, I've been running from the past, from attachments, from anything that might tie me down. But these past months with you, they've changed everything, Abigail." Hope began to bloom in her chest, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "James has offered me a permanent position as foreman at Evergreen," Wyatt revealed. "Caleb is moving on, his sister's husband died, and she needs help with their farm in Kansas. It would mean staying here, being part of the ranch operations year-round." And what did you tell him?" Abigail asked, hardly daring to breathe. Wyatt's blue eyes held her steadily. "I told him I'd think about it, that I needed to discuss it with you first." "With me?" Abigail repeated, surprised. "Why would your decision depend on me?" "Because," Wyatt said simply, "there's no point in staying if you don't want me here, and there's no point in discussing a future at Evergreen if that future doesn't include you as my wife." The word hung in the air between them, momentous in its simplicity. Wife. Abigail felt dizzy with the sudden shift in the conversation, with the realization that Wyatt wasn't planning to leave her but was instead proposing a life together. "Are you?" she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you asking me to marry you, Wyatt Porter?" A slow smile spread across Wyatt's face, the same smile that had first captured her heart on that dusty trail from Julesburg. "I suppose I am," he acknowledged, "though I'd planned something more romantic than a discussion about cattle drives and job offers." Abigail laughed, tears of joy springing to her eyes. "I don't need romance," she assured him. "Just you, just this promise that we'll face whatever comes together." "Is that a yes?" Wyatt asked, echoing his question from that day by the horse paddock. "Yes," Abigail confirmed without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Wyatt Porter." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a seal on their promise and a glimpse of the joy that awaited them. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment," he admitted, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's. James had it in safekeeping all these years, waiting for one of us to find the right woman." Abigail gazed at the ring, then at the man offering it, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. "It's beautiful," she whispered as Wyatt slipped it onto her finger. "Perfect. Like you," he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers. "I love you, Abigail Greenberg. And I promise, wherever life takes us, we'll go together." The announcement of their engagement was met with jubilation from James and Sarah, who had clearly been expecting it for some time. "About time you made an honest woman of her," James teased his brother, clapping him on the shoulder. "We were beginning to think we'd have to lock you two in the barn together to get things moving." Preparations for the wedding began immediately, with Sarah insisting that they marry before the cattle drive rather than waiting for Wyatt's return. "No sense in delaying happiness," she declared. "And besides, wouldn't you rather leave knowing she's legally your wife?" Wyatt couldn't argue with that logic, and so a date was set for early September, just 2 weeks away. It would be a small ceremony, performed by the minister from Fort Collins, with just the family and a few close neighbors in attendance. Abigail, who had no family to invite, was content with this arrangement, preferring intimacy to spectacle. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Sarah, despite the demands of caring for newborn Thomas, threw herself into preparations with characteristic energy, helping Abigail create a simple but elegant wedding dress from fine white muslin and lace purchased in town. James and Wyatt, meanwhile, worked on preparing a surprise for the bride, a renovation of one of the smaller cabins on the property, transforming it into a proper home for the newlyweds. The evening before the wedding, as Abigail sat with Sarah in the main house, putting the finishing touches on her dress, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Collins from Fort Collins rode up to the ranch, asking to speak with Abigail on a matter of some importance. Concerned, Abigail met with him in the sitting room, Wyatt at her side for support. The sheriff removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Miss Greenberg," he began, "I've received some news that I thought you should hear before your wedding tomorrow." He glanced at Wyatt, then continued. "Your stepmother, Meredith Greenberg, passed away 3 days ago in Julesburg. Influenza, according to the telegram I received." Abigail felt a strange mix of emotions at the news shock, certainly, but not grief. Meredith had shown her no kindness in life, had in fact tried to sell her like property. Yet she had been her father's wife, the last connection, however unpleasant to her former life. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." "There's more," the sheriff continued. According to the lawyer in Julesburg, your father's will was never properly executed after his death. Your stepmother claimed all his property as her own, but in fact, he left half to you upon your reaching the age of 18. He reached into his coat pocket, producing an official-looking document. This is a copy of the lawyer's findings. The house in Julesburg and a substantial sum from your father's bank account are legally yours. Abigail stared at the document in disbelief. After years of being treated as a burden, of being told she had no right to her father's property, to discover that he had provided for her after all was overwhelming. "What does this mean?" Wyatt asked the sheriff, his arm protectively around Abigail's shoulders. "It means," Sheriff Collins explained, "that Miss Greenberg, soon to be Mrs. Porter, I understand is a woman of some means. The house is valued at around $2,000 and the bank account contains approximately $3,000 more. It's quite a substantial inheritance." Abigail felt dizzy with the implications. $5,000, it was more money than she had ever imagined possessing. Enough to buy land of their own, to start a business, to secure their future in ways she hadn't dared to dream possible. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said finally, accepting the document with slightly trembling hands. "This is unexpected news." After the sheriff departed, promising to put Abigail in touch with the lawyer in Julesburg to finalize the details, she and Wyatt sat together on the porch, processing the sudden change in their circumstances. $5,000, Wyatt said, still sounding slightly stunned. "That's a fortune, Abigail. It's my father's legacy," she replied, gazing at the document in her lap. "All this time he was trying to protect me, even from beyond the grave, and Meredith." She shook her head, anger mingling with a strange sort of pity. She knew. She must have known what the will said. That's why she was so desperate to be rid of me before I turned 18. Wyatt nodded slowly. It makes sense now. She wanted the money for herself. And in the end, she had neither the money nor happiness, Abigail observed sadly. What a bitter life she must have led. They sat in silence for a moment, the evening breeze rustling the leaves of the nearby cottonwood trees. Finally, Wyatt spoke again, his voice hesitant. "This changes things, Abigail. With that kind of money, you could go anywhere, do anything. You don't need to tie yourself to a former drifter with no fortune to his name." Abigail turned to him in surprise, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. "Wyatt Porter," she said firmly, taking his face in her hands, "don't you dare suggest that money could change my feelings for you. I loved you when I had nothing but the clothes on my back, and I love you now with $5,000 to my name. The only difference is that now we have more choices about our future together." Relief washed over Wyatt's features, and he pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I just wanted to be sure," he murmured. "I couldn't bear the thought of you feeling obligated to marry me now that you have other options." Abigail laughed softly. "The only option I want is you, you ridiculous man. Though," she added thoughtfully, "we should discuss what to do with the inheritance. It's a decision we should make together as partners." Wyatt nodded, his arms still around her. "Whatever you want, Abigail, it's your inheritance." "No," she corrected gently. "After tomorrow, it will be our inheritance, and I think I already know what I want to do with it." "Oh," Wyatt raised an eyebrow, curious. Abigail smiled, a plan forming in her mind. "Part of it will go to expanding Evergreen. James and Sarah have been so good to us, and with the new baby, they could use the help. We'll invest in more land, more cattle, maybe even those thoroughbreds James has been talking about for the breeding program." Wyatt looked surprised but pleased. "And the rest?" "A trust for Thomas," Abigail decided, "and for any other children who might come along, both James and Sarah's, and—" she blushed slightly, "perhaps our own someday." The tenderness in Wyatt's eyes as he gazed at her made her heart swell with love. "Our own," he repeated softly, as if testing out the words. "I like the sound of that." "As do I," Abigail agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder as they watched the sun set over the mountains, the future stretching before them bright with promise. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the September sky a brilliant blue overhead. Abigail woke in her cabin to find a small bouquet of wildflowers on her doorstep, along with a note in Wyatt's bold handwriting. Until this afternoon when I can finally call you my wife. All my love, W. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes, and she carried the flowers inside, arranging them in a small jar of water on her table. This would be her last morning in the cabin after today. She would move into the renovated home that James and Wyatt had prepared for them, beginning a new chapter in her life. Sarah arrived mid-morning, baby Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms, to help Abigail prepare for the ceremony. "James has banished Wyatt to the barn for the day," she announced with a laugh. "Says it's bad luck for him to see you before the wedding." Together, they transformed Abigail from ranch helper to bride. Her honey-brown hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with small white flowers from Sarah's garden. The dress they had created fit perfectly, the simple lines flattering Abigail's slender figure, the lace at the collar and sleeves adding a touch of delicate beauty. "You look stunning," Sarah declared when they were finished, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Wyatt won't know what hit him." Abigail blushed, turning to examine her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The woman who looked back at her was a far cry from the frightened girl who had fled Julesburg 3 months ago. This woman stood tall, her eyes clear and bright with happiness, her future secure in the love of a good man. "I can hardly believe this is real," she admitted to Sarah. "Sometimes I think I'll wake up and find myself back in my stepmother's house, all of this just a beautiful dream." Sarah squeezed her hand affectionately. "It's very real, Abigail. You deserve every bit of this happiness." The ceremony was to take place at 3 o'clock in the garden behind the main house. As the hour approached, Abigail felt a curious calm settle over her, replacing the nervous anticipation she had expected. This was right, she knew with absolute certainty. Wyatt was the man she was meant to spend her life with, and today was merely the formal acknowledgement of what her heart had known since that night in Julesburg. James came to escort her to the garden, looking handsome in his best suit, his face beaming with happiness for his brother and the woman who had become like a sister to him. "You're a vision, Abigail," he told her sincerely. "Wyatt's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," she replied, taking his offered arm. "Your family has given me more than I ever dreamed possible." "And you've given us just as much in return," James assured her as they walked toward the garden. "Especially Wyatt. I've never seen my brother so content, so at peace with himself. That's your doing." The garden had been transformed for the occasion, with flowers from Sarah's prized rose bushes arranged in bouquets, white ribbons draped between the trees, and simple wooden chairs set up for the dozen or so guests. At the far end, beneath an arbor twined with late-blooming clematis, stood Reverend Tompkins from the Fort Collins Church, his prayer book in hand. And there, waiting for her with an expression of such love it took her breath away, was Wyatt. He was dressed in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his eyes that captured her, those blue eyes that had looked at her with kindness in a Julesburg saloon, with respect on the trail, and now with a love so deep it seemed to reach into her very soul. As Abigail walked toward him on James's arm, the small gathering of friends and neighbors faded from her awareness. There was only Wyatt, only the future they would build together, only the love that had grown between them against all odds. The ceremony itself was brief and traditional, with the familiar words taking on new meaning as they were applied to this specific union, to these two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. When Reverend Tompkins pronounced them husband and wife, and Wyatt leaned down to seal their vows with a kiss, Abigail felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration afterward was joyous and relaxed, with food prepared by Sarah and the wives of neighboring ranchers, music provided by Miguel on his guitar, and plenty of laughter and good wishes from all present. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Wyatt took Abigail's hand, leading her away from the party. "I have something to show you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "Your wedding gift." Curious, Abigail followed him along a path that led away from the main house, past her old cabin, and toward a part of the property she hadn't explored thoroughly. As they rounded a bend, she gasped in surprise. Before them stood a small but charming house, not a cabin, but a proper house with a covered porch, large windows, and a stone chimney. Lanterns had been hung from the porch rafters, illuminating the space with a warm, welcoming glow, and a sign above the door read Porter in carefully carved letters. "Wyatt," Abigail breathed, taking in the sight. "Is this for us?" "For us," he confirmed, his face lit with pleasure at her reaction. "James and I have been working on it for weeks whenever we could spare time from ranch duties. I wanted you to have a real home, not just a cabin, a place where we could build our life together." Tears of joy filled Abigail's eyes as she stepped onto the porch, running her hand along the sturdy railing. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "more than I ever dreamed of." "Wait until you see inside," Wyatt urged, opening the door with a flourish. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a spacious main room that served as both parlor and dining area, a separate kitchen with a new cookstove, and a bedroom at the back. Furniture had been arranged throughout, some familiar pieces that Abigail recognized from her cabin and from storage at the main house. "Sarah helped with the furnishings," Wyatt explained as Abigail moved through the space, touching each item with wonder. "And there's room to add on as needed, for a nursery perhaps someday." The mention of children brought a fresh wave of emotion, and Abigail turned to her new husband, her heart too full for words. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing his head down for a kiss that expressed everything she couldn't say. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Porter," he murmured. "Home," Abigail repeated, savoring the word. After years of feeling like an unwelcome guest in her stepmother's house, after the uncertainty of her flight from Julesburg, after the temporary sanctuary of the garden cabin, she finally had a true home again. And more importantly, she had someone to share it with, someone who loved her, valued her, and would stand beside her through whatever challenges life might bring. As twilight deepened into night, they returned briefly to the celebration to say their goodbyes, receiving hugs and well wishes from friends and family before slipping away to the privacy of their new home. There, in the soft glow of lamplight, they began the first chapter of their life together as husband and wife, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a desperate escape had transformed into the greatest blessing either could have imagined. 5 years later, 1880, the sound of children's laughter filled the air as Abigail Porter stood on the porch of her home, watching her 3-year-old daughter, Emily, chase butterflies in the garden while baby Thomas, just 8 months old and named after both her father and his older cousin, practiced his crawling skills on a blanket in the shade of a large oak tree. The years had been kind to the Porters and to Evergreen Ranch. With Abigail's inheritance, they had expanded the property significantly, adding new pastureland, increasing the cattle herd, and developing a successful horse breeding program that was now renowned throughout Colorado and beyond. The original house had been expanded as well, with a nursery added after Emily's birth and a small study for Wyatt, who had proved to have a talent for the business side of ranching that complemented James's skills perfectly. James and Sarah's family had grown too. Their son, Thomas, was now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's serious demeanor, and they had welcomed twin daughters, Grace and Hope, just 2 years ago. The two families were closely intertwined, their children growing up more like siblings than cousins, their shared work on the ranch creating bonds that went beyond mere partnership. Abigail's reflections were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching, and she shaded her eyes against the late afternoon sun to see Wyatt riding toward the house, his tall figure as striking now as it had been the day she first saw him in the rusty Spur saloon. 5 years of marriage had only deepened her love for him, each day revealing new facets of his character, new reasons to be grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. "Papa," Emily squealed, abandoning her pursuit of butterflies to run toward her father as he dismounted. "Papa's home," Wyatt scooped his daughter into his arms, tossing her high in the air before catching her securely, her delighted giggles making both parents smile. "And how's my little butterfly today?" he asked, carrying her toward the porch. "I caught 3, Emily declared proudly. "And Thomas tried to eat a grasshopper, but Mama stopped him." Wyatt laughed, setting Emily down before climbing the porch steps to greet his wife with a tender kiss. "Sounds like an eventful afternoon," he remarked, slipping an arm around Abigail's waist. "The usual chaos," Abigail replied with a smile, leaning into his embrace. "How was town?" "Productive," Wyatt reported. "The cattle sale is finalized, best price we've ever gotten, and," he added, reaching into his pocket, "I picked up something for you from the post office." He handed her a letter bearing the return address of Julesburg, Colorado. Abigail recognized the handwriting of Mr. Harmon, the lawyer who had handled her father's estate and who still occasionally wrote with updates about the sale of the house and other legal matters. "I wonder what he wants now," she mused, breaking the seal. As she read the letter, her expression changed from curiosity to surprise, then to a complex mixture of emotions that Wyatt couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" he asked when she finally looked up. Abigail folded the letter carefully before replying. "Do you remember that man in the saloon, the one my stepmother was trying to sell me to?" Wyatt's expression darkened at the memory. "I'm not likely to forget him." "His name was Silas Morgan," Abigail continued, her voice steady. "Apparently he died last month, and according to Mr. Harmon, he left a confession with the sheriff in Julesburg admitting to a string of crimes across several states." Wyatt's arm tightened around her. "What kind of crimes?" "Murder," Abigail said softly, mindful of Emily playing nearby. "At least 3 women in different towns over the past decade. He would acquire them in various ways, use them until he tired of them, and then—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "My God," Wyatt breathed, the full implication hitting him. "If I hadn't been there that night." "But you were," Abigail said firmly, turning to face him fully. "You were there, Wyatt. You saved me in more ways than either of us realized at the time." They stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the gravity of what might have been, both overwhelmed with gratitude for the intervention of fate that had brought them together. "I've always known I was lucky that you happened to be in Julesburg that night," Abigail said finally. "But now, to think what could have happened." "Don't," Wyatt urged gently, pulling her into his arms. "Don't dwell on what might have been. That's not the path life took for us." Abigail nodded against his chest, letting the warmth of his embrace chase away the chill that the letter had brought. "You're right. What matters is this: our home, our children, the life we've built together." As if to emphasize her point, baby Thomas let out a demanding cry from his blanket, clearly feeling he'd been ignored long enough. Abigail laughed, pulling away from Wyatt to retrieve their son. "Someone's feeling left out," she observed, lifting the baby into her arms. Wyatt followed, tickling Thomas's chubby cheek affectionately before turning to scoop up Emily, who had been tugging at his pant leg. With a child in each of their arms, they made their way into the house, where the aroma of Abigail's beef stew simmering on the stove greeted them. As they settled around the dinner table, Abigail looked at her family, at Wyatt carving the bread, at Emily chattering about her adventures of the day, at baby Thomas contentedly gumming a piece of soft carrot, and felt a profound sense of peace. The letter from Julesburg was a stark reminder of how differently her life might have turned out, but it also underscored the miracle of what she had now. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Abigail and Wyatt sat together on the porch swing, a tradition they had maintained since the early days of their marriage. The night was clear, the stars brilliant overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of late summer flowers from Sarah's garden. "I've been thinking," Abigail said, her head resting on Wyatt's shoulder, "about that night in Julesburg." Wyatt's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I thought we agreed not to dwell on that. Not about what could have happened," Abigail clarified. "About what did happen, about how a moment of kindness can change a life, many lives, really." She gestured toward the house where their children slept peacefully. "Without that one decision you made, none of this would exist." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I've never thought of it that way," he admitted. "At the time, it just seemed like the only thing I could do. I couldn't stand by and watch your stepmother sell you to that man." He shook his head. "I had no idea what I was really preventing, or what you were really beginning," Abigail added softly. "Our family, our home, our place here at Evergreen, all of it started with that one act of kindness." Wyatt turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "I used to think freedom meant having no ties, no responsibilities, always being able to move on to the next horizon," he said thoughtfully. "But I was wrong. True freedom is this: having a place where you belong, people who love you, work that matters. And you found that here." Abigail asked, though she already knew the answer. Wyatt smiled, the same smile that had first captured her heart all those years ago. "I found it the moment I met you, Abigail Porter. Everything else, the ranch, the children, our home, that's all just the beautiful result of that first discovery." He leaned down to kiss her, a kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of their years together, yet still carried the promise of all the years to come. When they separated, Abigail rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Wyatt Porter," she murmured. "Thank you for buying my freedom and then giving me a life worth more than I ever dreamed possible." "I love you too," he replied, his voice warm in the darkness, "and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." As they sat together beneath the vast Colorado sky, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a desperate escape from Julesburg to the peace and prosperity of Evergreen Ranch. There had been challenges along the way, certainly, but together they had built a life rich with love, purpose, and joy. And it had all begun with a chance encounter in a saloon backroom, with a cowboy who couldn't stand by and watch an injustice, with a young woman brave enough to reach for freedom, and with the extraordinary love that had grown between them, transforming them both in ways neither could have imagined. As the night deepened around them, Abigail silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Wyatt Porter into that saloon on that particular night. Some might call it luck, others destiny, but Abigail preferred to think of it as the first page of the story they were still writing together, a story of redemption, of second chances, and of a love that had turned freedom into something far more precious, a place to belong.